This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated online cinema streaming exceptional films from around the globe. Get your first month for free at mubi.com/storytellers.
I think a lot of times movies are we're too narrative focused, I think, in a weird way when it comes to movies, and film should operate as music in that sense, that there should be stuff where film just becomes film, and hopefully the story supports that apparatus. But to me, narrative is a means to an end. It's a means to kind of give you those sort of cathartic moments where it just becomes about image and sound, and it's just so fun to kind of put together. It's so fun to sort of, just imagine how different shots could work placed against each other. It's a whole kind of part of my brain I love using. It was important from that whole kind of thinking that from the very first image of the movie, the very first scene in the movie, that it just be very much what it was, that there be no beating around the bush. And then the rest of the movie could basically just riff on that theme. But I like the idea of basically having an entire movie within the opening scene of a movie, and kind of giving the audience the clothesline that then you can sort of elaborate on as it goes on.
I'm sorry.
No, stay.
If there's one theme that binds Damien Chazelle's stories together, it is to be found in the realm of dreams. His characters, both fictional and real, are modern-day heroes driven by a vision or a personal goal that they have to achieve in order to find a sense of fulfillment in their lives.
I want to be one of the greats.
What are you gonna do?
I have my own club.
And yet what we as the audience witness is not a glamorized story of success, but rather something more intimate, grounding the dream back into reality.
So I think it certainly started in Whiplash, and it was that idea of like, how does the world feel like to a jazz musician, And I was a jazz drummer myself, and so there was something about that kind of, where it's all about rhythm, just the sort of kineticism of that. I love that you can literally create a sense of music just through editing, even if there's no music on screen. That was an idea I love, and it was an idea that was really important in this movie, that even when there was no music on screen, it needed to still feel musical at every moment. I wanted the whole feel of the film to reflect what, again, it must have felt like to be going on these missions. So when we're inside the spacecraft, we try to really make you feel the claustrophobia, use sounds, use what you see, but also what you don't see, restrict the POV, again, really put the viewer into a totally immersive sort of experience, so they feel like they're launching into the air, they feel like they're hovering in space. It was important to me that the audience feel the pain, the physical pain. And what's interesting about instrumental music, what's interesting especially about the drums, is the physical side of it, is the fact that your muscles tense up, that at least my hands bleed. So I wanted to make sure that this movie really kind of made you live in the muck of that kind of pain. But also how Ryan would also often talk about, you have to create a character where after he's done kind of plunging through the atmosphere, comes back down to earth, barely, he has to take out the trash, he has to clean the pool, he has to figure out what to make his kids for breakfast, that there was a normalcy and a quotidian reality at the heart of all of this.
In some ways that was what interested me the most in it, was trying to take an event that's so famous, it's almost mythological, the Apollo 11 landing on the moon, and then try to peel back the mythology and look at what actually happened at a practical level, at a human level, what went into that event. This was a man who I think was forged through failure and through loss. He was not sort of born, this kind of born icon. He was not necessarily the sort of all-American hero from the outset. He was a human being. He was vulnerable. He made mistakes. He had flaws. And yet at the same time, there was obviously something special about Neil. There was something about his drive and about his vision, something you could see in his eyes, I think.
But if Chazelle uses this sense of normalcy to ground his stories into reality, he also utilizes it to depict the dichotomy that emerges as his characters strive to fulfill their dreams.
With La La Land, I wanted to explore how you balance life and art, and how you balance dreams and reality. It was this idea of choices that you make for the dream versus choices that you make for the relationship. Choices that you make for art versus choices that you make for love or for life.
This is why I don't think that we should be together.
And, we all kind of, wish we lived in a world where those things were always compatible. But sometimes they're not, and sometimes these choices can be messy, and one affects the other in ways that we didn't expect. And sometimes even the choice itself is murky.
This is what you wanted from me.
To be in this band?
To be in a band, to have a steady job,
I guess all I wanted was stability.
It's one thing to have these kind of perfect idealized dreams in your head of what kind of artist you're going to be, or what kind of life you're going to lead, or what love is going to look like for you. But reality has its own agenda, and sometimes dreams don't fit into reality, and you have to find that balance. And that's something the characters have to find in the movie, and I think it's something that musicals themselves are really adept at expressing. So it interests me. I think personally I'm in a better place than I was back when I, was younger and first moving to LA, I guess, in terms of finding that balance. But it's a balance you're always trying to seek, because art or any profession can be very solitary. And so how do you commit yourself to that and share yourself with either another human being or just with the people around you, that's a question that I think is very hard to solve.
In many ways, what Chazelle explores within this dichotomy is what happens when a desire to achieve a dream intensifies to the point that the tunnel vision becomes so narrow that all one can think of is that one seemingly unattainable goal.
There's this movie I love, this Sidney Lumet movie, it's Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. It's the kind of movie that's structured kind of like a domino effect, so that you start at a state of normalcy and then things go wrong and then they go more wrong, and then you think, okay, they can't possibly go more wrong, and then they go more wrong and then more wrong, and then you think, well, now it's getting ridiculous, and then they go more wrong. It's kind of like when people say like something like Casablanca, that the cliches start talking to each other and they create something beautiful. That a movie like Before the Devil Knows You're Dead actually, to me, works past the ridiculousness into something really incredible.
Now, are you a rusher or are you a dragger? Or are you gonna be on my fucking time?
Why do you care so much about being liked?
You're an actress. What are you talking about?
What are you doing? Stop.
Going to work.
Or just stop it. Just stop. Stop. Hack it!
Shit! I'll fucking kill you!
Maybe you just liked me when I was on my ass because it made you feel better about yourself.
You're in the realm of logic, and then you have to actually work through this area where you're no longer in logic, and then you wind up in something that's truer than logic is.
There's no easy way to say this. Ed, Gus, and Roger, they're gone.
What's funny about the moon landing is, for such a famous event, it's there's so much that's unknown about it, and I think particularly just what exactly went into making it a reality. And it cost a tremendous amount. It cost lives, it cost money, it tore families apart. There was this tremendous sacrifice and loss that came with the success story that we all know.
Do you question whether the program's worth the cost? In money and in lives?
That ultimately was the biggest question for me that, I wanted to try to grapple with in the movie, is to what extent do the ends justify the means? To what extent are we willing to kind of put up with monstrous behavior in the name of something we believe in, whether it's art or, or something else, some kind of achievement that we can all kind of tip our hat to and say that was good. At what point does that outweigh the costs,
We need to fail down here so we don't fail up there.
Hey, Neil. At what cost? Huh? At what cost? It's a little bit late for that question, isn't it, sir?
I grapple with, those kind of issues myself in terms of what's worth, what is the price of success worth, and how do you even define what success is? Is success leading a happy, healthy life and being a good person, or is success kind of leaving something behind for people who never knew you to appreciate? And that, certainly I don't think that the extremes that are depicted in the movie are necessary for success or to make great art or great anything. But there's certain cases in any art form where you see that kind of cause and effect. You see a work of art that was produced by either people being cruel to one another, people subjugating someone else, or people being cruel to themselves. And so it's in those cases that you have to ask whether you think that's okay.
Ignition sequence start.
At the end of the day, I agree that there is kind of, a way in which this can be seen as a musical, in the sense that it was all about kind of building up the drama in a certain traditional way and then exploding it into music. And music can just take over from words in such an elegant way that just buys you a lot. And it's more interesting to me to kind of find ways to resolve storytelling beats without words and through other forms, whether it's just images or just music. To me, it's, the heart and soul of it is when you get to do, quote unquote pure cinema. That to me is like, every movie is like, should try to be an excuse to do that. You try to tell a story that allows you to do that. In a way, the entire movie had to lead up to those last moments at the end. It had to all be kind of a prelude to that. And it had to be a very kind of blunt, sort of totally unflinching look at the costs of what that moment at the end was.
As the characters finally reach the end of their journeys, a last question arises. What is it that drives us to struggle for some hard-to-attain dream if the costs are so high? This is the main philosophical question that is slowly developed throughout Chazelle's work, culminating in his examination of Neil Armstrong in First Man.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I think what was so fascinating about him is that I think in some ways he himself couldn't even articulate why the moon, or why. There was something deeper to Neil that was not so much about ambition and more just about constantly wanting to see just beyond. Just that very kind of primal desire of humankind to just peek behind the curtain, and how that got sort of sublimated into one individual in this case and one pursuit. I think that became more interesting to me, I guess, and more profound than someone who wants to be a great drummer or something. There was just that's a very concrete goal, but this felt like it had something that was harder to put into words, and therefore I think we were really kind of motivated to try to film it.
Although explored most succinctly in First Man, in a sense all of Chazelle's characters align with this primal pursuit, embodying the archetypal warriors and the explorers of old, insatiable in their desire to conquer, to tread on undiscovered ground, always seeking to expand the edges of their existence, driven by a passion that gives meaning to their lives.
The movie is about passion, and it's about passion for art and passion for love, and ultimately the passion with which we wanted to approach the movie, with which we wrote it, with which we composed the music for it, with which we presented it to people, and with which we intended to put it on screen. I'd like to think that kind of wound up infecting people.
I guess I'll always be, no matter what the genre is, trying to find that kind of deep-seated connection where at the end of the day I'm writing or filming about my own emotions, my own experiences, whether literally or not. But I always am trying to, that's another balance I guess I would always like to try to find, which is, try to have stuff that feels like it's very thought through and very cinematic, for lack of a better word, but that still has spontaneous life in it, that still has some real humanity, the stuff that you can't storyboard or write,
Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video. In case you didn't already know, Mubi is a really cool streaming service that actually makes it a lot easier to find a good movie to watch, because at any given time they have just 30 films available. Every day they add a film, and every day they take one away. And I'm not talking about, your run-of-the-mill assortment of films. Mubi actually has a curated selection of high-quality films and documentaries from all over the globe, many of which you might not be familiar with, and which you likely wouldn't be able to see on many other streaming services. So, for instance, if you're a fan of Damien Chazelle, you might know that he's a huge fan of classic French musicals. And right now, in parts of Europe and South America, Mubi is showing a documentary about Jacques Demy's The Young Girls of Rochefort, which was a big inspiration for Chazelle's La La Land. So if you sign up now, you not only get 30 days free access to their entire assortment of films, but you also help us sustain the channel by showing your appreciation to a company that has been consistently helping out video essay creators like us here on YouTube. So if all of that sounds good to you, head on over to mubi.com/storytellers, where you can get that extended 30-day free trial. Again, that's mubi.com/storytellers, where you can sign up to help us out. Thanks, guys.